our final story, I'm going to tie together baseball and Gaslight Square, and here's how. Because back in those days, if you were a young single ball player, one of the really great places you could live was Gaslight Square, although team management would prefer you live someplace with fewer distractions. Well, 45 years ago this month, February 10th of 1959, a Cardinals ball player and a lot of other people were in Gaslight Square and wished they'd been somewhere else. Because that was the night of the big tornado. 21 people were killed, 200 people were injured. It wasn't the first time a tornado came through the city. Probably isn't going to be the last.
My address was Olive at Boyle, 4255A Olive Street. And from what I was told, Olive and Boyle was one of the worst areas struck. So we were right in the middle of it.
The tornado of 1959 is best remembered for knocking down KTVI's broadcast tower, for damaging the arena, and not just for smashing the intersection of Olive and Boyle, but for the rebuilding that brought the heyday of Gaslight Square.
Well, you know, I was living above Smokey Joe's Grecian Terrace, and I was playing baseball for the Cardinals.
That February night, Joe Cunningham was still awake, discussing Bible passages with his roommate.
And then all of a sudden, it's 2 o'clock, and 2:04, the tornado came through our apartment. And I saw the wall crack, and the paint cracked, and that's when I dove back in the bedroom. But the fireplaces, the gas fireplaces, was shaking. It scared me. It just completely scared me.
We've all seen pictures and video of tornado damage. Seeing it in person really brings it home. But surviving it, being there as it passes through, that's something that people can't adequately describe, and it's something they never forget. In 1997, we interviewed Isa Lee Bishop. She was 105 years old at the time, and there were things she couldn't remember about her life, but she could tell you about the 1896 tornado that went through her South Side neighborhood.
This was at 2706 Allen Avenue. This is I, 4 years old. I walked over bricks, and that impressed me, the idea of walking on bricks.
The 1896 tornado was the city's worst, partly because it hit some of the most densely populated areas of St. Louis. Hundreds were killed on this side of the river, hundreds more in East St. Louis. "1927 was the year of another twister that went through the heart of the city, from Forest Park through the Cathedral neighborhood and on towards Fairgrounds Park. It hit on a weekday when kids had just sat back down in their classrooms following lunch.
And we came out of the room, which was right close to the stairwell. But the stairwell had collapsed, and I want to say at this time, this roar of the bricks and the building falling and everything, the stairwell had collapsed, and we looked down to a gaping hole, no place to go. Now that was 70 years ago, and I have never forgotten the sounds of the roar of that tornado, and the sounds of the building collapsing and the roar has stayed with me. It's just as vivid as it happened yesterday.
There were those who lived through the 27 tornado and rebuilt and then had to go through it all over again 32 years later. The 1959 tornado followed nearly the exact same path, which now included Joe Cunningham's Gaslight Square apartment. The storm rolled into the St. Louis area. At Hampton and Oakland, Channel 2's tower came crashing down onto nearby apartment houses. Part of the arena's roof blew off, and one of the decorative entrance towers was torn away. They would end up tearing down the other one as well. And at Olive and Boyle, Joe Cunningham surveyed the scene.
And all the buildings to the right of us were defaced. And there was a building, it was a little nightclub across the street from us, and they had just let the people out at 2 o'clock. And that building was completely demolished. When we finally got dressed and went down the stairway, there was a lot of rocks and glass and everything there. And when we went out on the street, then we saw it was like an air raid.
In fact, the fear of an air raid was one of the things that was making St. Louis better at dealing with the threat of a tornado in 1959, better than in 1927 or 1896.
We interrupt our normal program to cooperate in security and civil defense measures.
This was the 50s, and the days of putting your head on your desk were gone. Air raid drills would become disaster drills in all schools, and all the technology and the warning systems developed in the war and the Cold War were being applied to spot approaching storms and to get out the warnings. George Brancato was the area's meteorologist in charge the year the tornado hit.
He, at that time, had just installed, shortly before this, one of the first radar used for weather. It was a modified radar that we obtained from the military, and it had been rehabbed so that we could use it for spotting weather.
Unfortunately, it didn't make much difference in the 59 tornado. It was a worst-case scenario. Any warnings would go out to a sleeping population, and it was February. Even with today's advanced radars, quick-forming winter twisters often cannot be detected soon enough.
It was determined that the tornado actually developed just as it got into the St. Louis area, so the population could not be advised in advance.
The same storm system brought rain and flash floods. For a lot of people, 1959 was a terrible winter.